Welcome to Decoding Healthcare Research. I'm your host, Efrain Riveros, Dr. E.F. Rain. Today, we will continue exploring different aspects of exercise. In particular, we will touch on browning of adipose tissue, and more importantly, the influence of exercise on circadian rhythms and how all these different interrelations work. So we have an expert here, and it's an honor to have her. We have Dr. Milena Shönke. She's a researcher of the Department of Medicine, Division of Endocrinology in Leiden University in the Netherlands. Welcome, Dr. Shönke.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So when we started doing some research about exercise and how different metabolic pathways develop during that process, we encountered the importance of brown adipose tissue. And this topic has been a reason for controversy among researchers. Its mechanism is exciting, if you will, because there are different interventions that seem to affect those pathways. But first of all, I would like to ask you, what is the brown adipose tissue, and why is it important in the context of exercise?
Yeah, so brown adipose tissue is, as the name says, a fat tissue. But other than the white fat that's in the rest of the body, brown adipose tissue can actually burn a lot of energy. It has a specific molecular switch that allows it to just burn off a lot of fat, and in the process generate heat. And babies who need to stay warm, of course, they have a lot of brown adipose tissue. But as we age, we lose some of this brown fat. And conditions like obesity, for instance, also can reduce the amount of brown fat we have further. So for around 15 years now, the idea has been, if we can stimulate this brown fat more to burn off more of this fat we have in excess, we can promote a healthy body weight and a healthy metabolic regulation in the body. And for this, multiple drugs and interventions have been tested or are being currently tested.
So when you say that during adult life, the percentage of brown adipose tissue comes down, what are the mechanisms for conversion of white fat into brown fat?
Yeah, so you have a process that's called browning, which can turn fat tissue that looks white into a more brownish fat tissue. But the idea is actually that you have cells that are kind of on the verge of going either direction. They're called beige or bright adipocytes, and they can kind of be triggered to turn into brown adipocytes. But then the other way around, you can also kind of lose this brown fat, and then it's just replaced by white fat. So this happens with aging or with obesity, for instance.
And at the molecular level, what genetic expressions are triggered in that transition from white to brown?
So there are several molecular markers that are kind of the fingerprint of brown adipose tissue. This is one enzyme called UCP1. This is an uncoupler, which is responsible for this process of generating heat instead of just generating a lot of other energy. So this UCP1 needs to be induced, and in this process, you have a bunch of transcription factors recruited that need to be induced.
So, and this is triggered in the context of exercise, as you mentioned. So I assume then there is some crosstalk between the muscle and the adipose tissue. How are they connected, and how can you explain us the process?
So for this is first maybe important to distinguish a little bit between the different models we do research in. So we have, of course, ideally we want to improve the health of humans, but to research this, we often turn to animal models that allow us to, for instance, control the conditions a lot better. And a lot of this research has been done in mice. And in mice, indeed, we can see that exercise training over time stimulates browning or activates the brown adipose tissue. And this is, for instance, done through secreted factors from the muscle. So active skeletal muscle can secrete so-called cytokines that can activate the brown fat. And you, of course, have a metabolic shift during exercise. The active muscle requires a lot of energy. So the adipose tissue and the liver and other tissues kind of contribute for the muscle to have enough energy. So that environment in the body also stimulates the brown fat. In humans, however, we know now that exercise is not the best stimulus for browning or for the activation of brown fat. We know that cold exposure works fairly well because, as I said in the beginning, the function of the brown fat is to keep the body warm. So if you're continuously or exposed to extreme cold, like an ice bath, for instance, then you can activate the brown fats. And humans, exercise doesn't do the trick for the activation of brown fat, it seems.
So that brings me to one of the papers that you published, titled "Can Aerobic Exercise Really Be a Warm-up for Brown Adipose Tissue?" published in the Journal of Physiology in 2022, and you expressed some concern about the experimental conditions when they use mice. Because those experimental conditions in terms of environmental temperature can affect the results, and that probably limits the translation of this research into the human setting. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. So, as I mentioned, temperature is a really important factor in the activity of brown adipose tissue, and humans have evolved to the point that we rarely experience a lot of cold for an extended period of time because we just dress warm or we go inside. However, in when we look at the mice, these are kind of standardized animal facilities across the world that typically have a normal room temperature, or what humans consider normal. But for mice in the cage, especially if they don't have a lot of nesting material or a lot of mouse friends to huddle up with, they feel rather cold. So our normal room temperature is not what a mouse would consider a comfy temperature. So then you kind of have a situation where the mice continuously feel a little cold and activate their brown fat. So then you have a different starting point as when you study this in humans. And in humans, you can, of course, look at individuals living in different climate regions. You can compare, looking at Europe, you can compare Scandinavians to people living in South Italy, for instance, or in the US, I don't know, someone living in Wisconsin to someone living in Florida. But you have a lot of confounders in those studies generally, because humans have found quite many ways to stay warm anyway.
Yeah, and that limits the applicability of the results. And but there is, my perception is that researchers are trying to find common pathways between different interventions. And as you mentioned, the voluntary cold exposure activates the brown adipose tissue, and it sounds nice that exercise does the same. And probably, and this is my next question, if you exercise under cold temperatures, maybe that would be an adjuvant for activating the brown tissue, you think?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think anyone has really tried this. I'm not sure, because when you exercise, of course, you get warm from the exercise itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, unless you're maybe in like a really cold ice chamber, you would probably start sweating at some point. So your body doesn't really feel the cold that you would need to activate the brown fat. So once again, in humans, the exercise doesn't seem to be the best stimulant for
activator. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And there are other aspects to fine-tune the effect of exercise, and one of them have been extensively studied by your group, and it has to do with timing of exercise and how it is affected by circadian rhythm, and also exercise affects the circadian clock, specifically in peripheral tissues. This is a topic that is new for most of us, and in my position of just a learner, I want to ask you, where is the relationship between circadian clocks and exercise?
Yes, so the majority of the processes, especially the metabolic processes in our body, are controlled by the circadian clock. So our body does something else, something different in the morning when we wake up than in the middle of the night when we're asleep, and that has to be this way. If this is disturbed, we're getting sick. So several factors, external and internal factors, regulate this endogenous clock, this internal clock. And one very important one, which is always called the master time giver, is light. Obviously, when we open our eyes, light hits our retinas, and the signal is sent to the brain, and the body gets the information. It's time to wake up now. But there are other cues as well. For instance, food intake. Snacking in the middle of the night tells the body, okay, it's time to wake up now, but now we're going back to bed, so we're confused. And another factor is exercise, because obviously when you exercise, your muscles get really activated. You need more blood flow to the muscle. This is a whole body response that makes exercise possible. And we know that the molecules, the so-called core clock, so the molecules that define this circadian rhythm within each cell, they respond to exercise, because you have mechanic stress on the muscle cells, and you have all these nutrient fluxes that change during exercise. So this is why we initially, once again in mice, where we can easily control all the conditions, we train mice or exercise them at different times during the day. So mice are nocturnal, so they are active during the dark phase, so we can just switch it around. We then saw that in the muscle, but also in other tissues like the adipose tissue, once again, the brown adipose tissue and the liver, all these very important metabolic organs, you see a distinct molecular response depending on the time of day. And going back to the initial statement that the circadian rhythm regulates almost everything in the body, it makes sense that your body is kind of primed for exercise at a certain time, usually the time when you're awake, rather than at a time when your body knows it should be sleeping right now.
Yes, exactly. And taking into account, obviously, there is like a central clock that is in the hypothalamus, but every tissue has their own clock that is more or less aligned to the central clock. But when it comes to exercise, one question that is very common among people, trained and untrained individuals, is what time of the day would be better to do exercise, considering that there is a close relationship between these two factors, the circadian clocks and the exercise. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a question that I've been asking myself for about 10 years now. So we have been working on this extensively. And the question is a little bit of, what do you want to get out of the exercise? So often when you talk to athletes, they want to have peak performances, they want to have personal records, they want to, train and compete at the point where they have the best outcomes. And we know already since the 80s, I think, that the muscles are the strongest in the late afternoon and evening. And there's another group from the Netherlands who found out that this has to do with the mitochondrial capacity in muscles. So in the evening, due to this internal circadian clock, the mitochondria are more efficient, so you get more power output of the muscle. So if you want to have a weightlifter competition, you should do it in the afternoon, late afternoon or evening. And you should then also particularly train at the times that your competition will be at, because your body adjusts to that. I find the health side of exercise a bit more important for our society because that concerns more people. So we have been asking the question, what is the best time to train in the context of metabolic health? And there are several studies on that. One nice one from Sweden, from the group where I did my PhD. That was an individual with diabetes mellitus type 2 and overweight, and these people were training on stationary bikes, and they were doing this in the morning or in the afternoon for several weeks in the morning, and then a break, and then for several weeks in the afternoon. And during this time, their blood glucose levels were measured, and it turned out that the training in the afternoon, I think it was around 5 or 6 p.m., was better for the glucose levels. So when you have diabetes, you want to avoid these spikes in blood glucose, and morning exercise caused those spikes to a greater extent than evening exercise. So the conclusion there was that late exercise will be better for individuals with type 2 diabetes. For type 1 diabetes, there has been some indication that morning exercise might be better. So it is not even a one-size-fits-all for diseases, but certainly also not for individuals, because you also have something called a chronotype, which is your personal, it's defined by the midpoint of your sleep. If you're kind of left to your own accord and can decide yourself when you want to go to bed and wake up. So naturally, there are people who are more morning persons who like getting up at, I don't know, 5 or 6 a.m. And there are people who like to go to bed much later and then naturally also wake up later. So this so-called chronotype, whether you're an early bird or more of a night owl, also probably has an effect on this. But on a molecular level, we're trying to figure this out right now. And I'm also working on fatty liver disease, which is a very, very prevalent disease in the world. Almost 30% of the people have it. And it can progress into really severe liver failure and liver cancer. And we have no drugs for it right now. So lifestyle interventions are the only thing we have. So diet and exercise. And potentially the new gut hormone-based drugs. But so far it's lifestyle interventions. And there it seems like in our mouse cohort, we're starting now also a clinical trial on that. But in mice also, once again, late exercise is better. So late for the mice, meaning at the end of the dark phase, which is their active period. For humans, that would be the end of the day. So late exercise, late afternoon or evening. And there we also see, that's very interesting, that the bacteria in the gut change with exercise, but only with late exercise and not with early exercise. And the gut microbiota has been in the last 10 years, I think, more and more been investigated in connection to health. And when we talk about liver health, when we eat something and the gut absorbs it, everything goes from the gut straight to the liver. So the liver is the organ that kind of gets first hit by anything that comes from the gut. This can be nutrients, drugs, alcohol, whatever. And these bacteria produce metabolites that can affect the liver. And it seems like when the mice at least train late, the bacteria produce more of these healthy metabolites that have a positive impact on the liver. So we see that mice that train late have healthier livers than mice that train early. So we still have a little bit to go there to kind of have a clear statement or recommendation for individuals. But we're definitely on making progress on understanding molecular processes in this circadian interaction.
Yeah, and it seems to be the case that pointing in that direction of doing the exercise late may have its benefits, obviously taking into account the chronotype of each person. And are there differences related to gender, male versus female, or is it the same for both?
That is once again a very good question, but also one that's difficult to answer because, as you know, traditionally a lot of studies were only done in men, and only in the past years there's been a focus on doing it more in more balanced cohorts. There seem to be differences. Yeah, I mean, women also, on average, have more adipose tissue than men, relatively speaking, compared to the body weight. Adipose tissue has an important role on metabolic function. So there seem to be differences. We don't know, we don't understand them very well yet. But yes, it's likely that women have potentially different intracellular regulatory mechanisms than men that need to be taken into account.
And some of these comments about cardiometabolic disease and exercise in the context of the circadian rhythm can be found in one nice editorial that was put by this team, published in Frontiers in Endocrinology in 2023. The link is going to be in the description of the video. And now I would like to move on to an experimental study that you nicely conducted. The title of the paper is "Time of Day Determines Post-Exercise Metabolism in Mouse Adipose Tissue," published in PNAS Journal. This one was published also this year. And I would like you to walk us through the goals of this study and what you found. Even though it's an animal model, and as we know, there are some limitations when you translate it to humans, the findings in terms of the effect of exercise on the circadian clock are very important. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, so this study was kind of a spin-off experiment from a study I already mentioned earlier, where we trained mice at different times, which was either at the beginning of their active period or at the beginning of their rest period. So in humans, the equivalent would be morning or evening exercise right before going to bed. And over a large range of tissues, we then analyzed gene expression and metabolite levels. And then the adipose tissue here was looked at separately. But the question was, indeed, like, what is the response of adipose tissue, in this case white fat, which is the majority of the fat we have, of course. What is the response to exercise at different times? And does it matter for the fat when we exercise? And also here, so in this particular case, we looked at inguinal adipose tissue. This is the fat tissue in the belly of the mice, which we know is fairly responsive to exercise normally. So you can see molecular changes there. And also here, we then we looked at RNA, so gene expression levels, and at certain specific metabolites. And we then saw that the exercise really had time-specific effects also on the fat tissue. And this affected, for instance, the expression of these core clock markers, so the molecules in the cell that regulate those metabolic the circadian processes. And then we did RNA sequencing analysis and found several markers that respond differently. So you can really see a time-specific fingerprint of exercise on the adipose tissue.
Yeah, and that is very exciting, because it's clear that the effect of exercise happens at multiple levels, and now that you are exploring the importance of the circadian clock and how exercise can impact that is definitely going to help other researchers dig even deeper into those intricacies. And that's something that we appreciate. And again, it's an honor to have you here. You know, listening directly from people doing the research is always a delight. And in this case, that we are so interested in metabolic health, exercise, and living a healthy life, this definitely adds value to our quest. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and to share your knowledge and wisdom with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Shönke.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. This was a very delightful conversation. And for our audience, you will find the links to the papers that we discussed today. And don't forget to leave us your feedback about this episode and past episodes. Thank you very much and see you next time.